So, guys, I do want to say two things that, first of all, I need to make an apology for a video that I did. That, when I was reviewing AEW, I gave it a D plus for Wrestle Dream. And actually, I want to move my grade up to like a C plus because, I think that, there's a lot of good things that did happen on the show. And part of it was like, sorry, I got the hiccups listening to Busted Open podcast with Bully Ray and Mark Henry. The big reason why I gave it a D plus was just because there was a lot of logic holes and there was just a lot of like more focused on matches instead of storyline and inconsistencies. But really, that there was a bunch of saving graces for the show. That they've had a bunch of like heels, and they also were experimental by having an ending that did not feel right, that made people go home unhappy, really. I think that, am I more interested in seeing what happens on Dynamite on Wednesday? Absolutely, because, of what we saw with the Bullet Club, with the John Moxley faction and what they did to Brian Danielson. I like what Bully Ray was saying that, obviously it's true that, when you watch a movie, and Mark Henry saying this as well, that heels drive wrestling businesses. What made Hulk Hogan so good was that he was fighting against all the bad guys. He was fighting against, Andre the Giant. And also when you look at, you look at the Attitude Era, it was the evil Vince McMahon that was the right opponent for Austin, really. And that's got to be like John Moxley, that he has to be like the right bad guy for the company because they want to put the title on Darby Allin. It either has to be, it has to be John Moxley as the top villain. And I also think that when you look at people like Will Ospreay, who is a favorite of the company, really, definitely having him struggle with the Don Callis family now is a good storyline. So sometimes, I also agree with what Mark Henry said. It's almost like, you watch a movie and you want to see like these villains be built up as these impossible people to beat. And then ultimately you have the hero that comes in and is able to do that. And, another great example is you look at Roman Reigns. They really built him up for 3 years as a top villain. And then they had Cody Rhodes actually beat him and all that, And then you look at somebody like John Cena, where a lot of people say that, the problem with John Cena was that he never really had a good rival or a good opponent because he was always somebody that could plow through everybody. Like really, the only challenge that I remember that he ever had was Randy Orton. When Randy Orton became the champion, and then he worked through Jeff Hardy. He had that match with John Cena where he bitch slapped the referee, and it was just hard to get the title off of Randy Orton because he was just doing whatever he could to be just relentless and all that stuff. That was a really good just like obstacle for John Cena, really. But the other issue too is that when you think of companies like AEW, that as Tony Khan famously said, he books for the sickos, and the problem is that if you're only booking for an audience of not a lot of people, what's going to happen is you're going to get to a point where it becomes either very predictable or ultimately people will just criticize you and say, oh, well, you can't take risks and whatever. And I totally agree with that. I think that, like I said, the big issue is storytelling, but I really would say that I really appreciate the creative risk that they took with actually having, a sad ending, because that's actually the first time they ever done a sad ending in AEW. And then the other thing that I will say is I like what Bully Ray said, that do you really think this is the final send-off for the final send-off for Brian Danielson? Absolutely not, because that would totally be very anticlimactic. He's definitely going to come back in the future. I actually think that I have this image of him, bring the ambulance back to the company. So I do think that, that's going to happen eventually. But I think the point of it is that, there's definitely a lot of things that can happen and will happen in AEW that can be really exciting. But it's good that they have to take, they need to take more creative risks, and they have the money to do that. And definitely, if they're always going to end the show, every pay-per-view that you've had for the past 5 years, so if it's like close to 30 or 40 or almost 50 pay-per-views, if all of it's been one happy ending, and then one of them is just like a sad ending. And people are now talking about it and may say, okay, we got to change the formula a bit. They are a company, in my opinion, that needs to experiment a lot more. So, I mean, I have to give them a lot of credit, and I commend them a lot for being very experimental, because um, not a lot of people will take that risk, and I think that's very important, because if you want to be successful in this world, you have to know how to be experimental, and I think that's very important. And I kind of like agree with what Mark Henry and Bully Ray were saying, that honestly, as you said, when you watch movies, when you when you watch movies, and when you know watch wrestling, it's ultimately the story of the heel making an obstacle for a babyface. And sometimes there are certain situations where you have like a mega babyface, like a John Cena or a Hulk Hogan or Dusty Rhodes or an AJ Styles in TNA Wrestling or something like that, where actually, you can warrant a long title reign. But usually it's the bad guys creating obstacles is what, is what really sells it, really. So I think that, they have a really good dynamic going on in AEW. I think that they just have to like go up and down the roster and make sure everything just makes sense story-wise. I think the stories don't make sense, and that's the big issue. But however, this whole storyline with Bryan Danielson and Jon Moxley and all that stuff, it could lead to something really great, and I think it is, and it does make a sense of story. It did a great job of establishing who are the baby faces, who are the heels, what's going to happen really, and what's going to come out of it. So there's definitely a lot of things to look forward to, and I think that ultimately the other thing they'll say is that I'm going to the Philadelphia show next weekend, and then after that they have a Providence show, and then they have a Bridgeport show, they have an Albany show, they have Full Gear, and then they have the World's End show. So that's roughly 6 more shows I'm going to this year, and I think I look forward to all of them. I just think that what I look forward to is definitely how this story is going to play out. What I'm not looking forward to is just very, very bad. It's just very bad storytelling, which AEW struggles with. I think that they have to just, do a clusterfuck. I mean, they have to kind of unfix their clusterfuck, or sometimes they may just have to say something like, okay, there's a couple of storylines like the women's division where we're going to revamp it, and we're going to just, forget everything and just restart it. And sometimes that's what you got to do, really. So yeah, there's definitely a bunch of things they need to do to fix their storytelling. But ultimately, I do agree with what they're saying. I think that there's a lot of issues with AEW not taking risks, and also like when they took the risk of having a sad ending and a cliffhanger and what Mox is going to do next. Really, I really, really think that you don't know what's going to happen next, but it's definitely intriguing enough for people to watch, really. And like as I said, even though they switched nights, really, they got less than 400,000 people watching their show. So it is a sign that they really have to give a shit. If they really want, they have a contract for 5 years, but if they really want a contract, after that 5 years, they really have to get their shit together. And I think that that's kind of what AEW is right now. It has to be in to get your shit together mode, and I think they're going to actually, accomplish a lot of great things. I think, like as I said, I think that Tony Khan does care about professional wrestling. I think he wants to learn from his failures. I think he wants to be successful. I see that way more in him than I do in Dixie Carter, and maybe to a certain extent in Eric Bischoff. Like when Eric Bischoff was not doing well after WWE became hot during the Attitude Era, it really felt like, as a lot of people, a lot of historians said that he really didn't care. And then also, you look at Dixie Carter, where, I think when Hogan and other people were causing problems in the company, she didn't kind of step in and say, like, okay, well, I need to bring in people who actually really understand it. Like, as I said, she should have brought in Paul Heyman and said, like, okay, well, look, you're not working for WWE now. Our company is all messed up. We need you to actually just, we actually need to step to help us out, really. So I just think that there's a lot of just, things that that really needs to happen with AEW to be great, and definitely creative endings and endings that are not always this happy ending of a pay per view. I think that's also very important. So we'll see what happens with AEW, but I'm definitely interested and excited for the future. And I also appreciate Mark Henry and Bully Ray for adding their advice to this.